When you think of a traditional science classroom, you probably picture something very much like a museum.
Oh, yeah. Glass display cases everywhere.
Exactly. Neatly labeled facts and right and wrong answers pinned down like butterflies on a display board.
Right, and you just walk in, look at the exhibits, and try to memorize what the little plaques say.
Yeah, and your textbook is basically your tour guide. You follow along, listen to the facts, and you try your absolute best not to touch anything because you might break it.
Which makes the entire experience fundamentally passive.
But if you actually want someone to learn how the physical world works, science isn't a museum at all. It's a messy, loud, complicated workshop. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we've got a stack of documents from what looks like a quiet revolution happening in science education. We're looking at a project called CIPS and this really fascinating middle school framework out of Alaska called BioForge.
Yeah, it's a huge paradigm shift.
Our mission today is to unpack what actually happens when you tear down that museum, hand students the tools, and, just let them make some noise.
Because what we're looking at in this source material is a structural shift. It moves from simply learning about a scientific topic to actively figuring out observable phenomena.
Right.
The goal here is taking students out of that passive visitor role and turning them into active designers, and really, community stewards.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because for decades, the routine has been pretty standard. You memorize the parts of a cell, you take a multiple choice test, and you forget it 3 weeks later.
Pretty much.
But by the end of this deep dive, you, the listener, are going to see how baking soda bread, owl pellets, and 11,000-year-old indigenous engineering are all connected to this highly practical concept called realistic self-assessment.
And to understand how this new curriculum operates mechanically, we first have to look at how it completely redefines what it means to be wrong.
Which is huge. Because in the old museum model, a wrong answer is just a failure. It's a bad grade.
Right, it's a stopping point.
But in these SEPS documents, and SEPS stands for Stackable, Instructionally Embedded, Portable Science Assessments, they use this approach called an anchor phenomenon.
Yes.
So instead of starting a unit with a vocabulary list on the board, they start with a puzzle.
They just drop the students right into a mystery.
Right into it. I'm looking at the curriculum outlines here. In Grade 5, Unit 1, students are tasked with comparing regular bread to yeastless baking soda bread to try and figure out chemical reactions.
Which is super tangible.
Yeah, and in Unit 2, they are literally dissecting an owl pellet to map out how energy flows in an ecosystem.
Wow.
And by Grade 8, they aren't reading about gravity in a book. They are analyzing raw images from the James Webb Space Telescope to understand gravity and artificial satellites.
See, the phenomenon itself drives the need to know the science. The students have to figure out the mystery, and they suddenly realize, oh, I actually need scientific concepts to solve this.
Okay, but let me pause you there and push back on this, because I can hear the skeptics already. If we are throwing 10-year-olds into complex mysteries like the James Webb Telescope or, chemical leavening agents without front-loading the vocabulary first, aren't they just going to come up with totally incorrect answers?
Oh, absolutely.
So how is this better than just giving them the facts straight away? It seems highly inefficient.
Well, that is the most common critique, but the framework addresses it directly through a document called the 7th Grade Life Science Misconception Map.
Okay, the misconception map.
Yeah. In this new paradigm, misconceptions aren't wrong answers that need to be erased. They are viewed as highly logical extensions of a student's limited experience.
Right.
When a kid tries to explain the world intuitively, they are building a mental model based on what they've seen so far.
So let me see if I can translate that. A misconception is basically like a software bug. It's not that the student's brain is broken or that they're bad at science. Their mental model actually works perfectly for their small world. But the software crashes when they try to apply it to a larger, more complex problem. So the teacher's job isn't to format the hard drive, it's just to help them debug the code.
That is a perfect analogy. The buggy code is actually essential scaffolding. I mean, think about the next generation science standards, which these documents rely heavily on. They emphasize something called three-dimensional learning.
Which honestly sounds like a buzzword.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean mechanically?
Well, mechanically, it means weaving three things together. Doing the actual work of science, understanding the core ideas, and making broad connections.
Okay.
You have to navigate the students' existing buggy ideas and guide them to use actual scientific practices to test those ideas. It's only by struggling to explain that James Webb image that a student realizes their old mental model crashes.
Right.
And that failure makes them hungry for the actual disciplinary core ideas to fix their code.
I remember when I was a kid, I used to think the moon was physically following our car when we drove on the highway at night.
Oh, sure. Classic.
Because from my perspective, the trees moved, the houses moved, but the moon stayed in the window. It was a completely logical conclusion based on my data.
Right.
If a teacher just told me, though, that's an optical illusion, I just memorized the phrase.
Huh.
But if they asked me to map the angles, I discover the bug in my own logic.
And you'd remember the correct concept forever because you fought for it.
Yeah. But that raises a massive administrative problem. If the wrong answer is a feature and not a bug, and learning is about debugging mental models rather than memorizing facts, how on earth do you grade that?
It's tricky.
You can't just run a multiple-choice Scantron test to measure a student's evolving thought process.
No, you really can't. And that is exactly what the SIPS project was designed to solve. It was funded by a competitive grant for state assessments from 2020 to 2023, specifically to measure the unmeasurable.
Okay, so you used the term stackable and instructionally embedded earlier when defining SIPS. Break that down for me. If I'm a student in this classroom, what does the test actually look like?
So stackable means you aren't just taking one giant high-stakes test in May that halts all learning. You take small stacks of assessments throughout the year that build a larger picture of your progress.
Oh, nice.
And instructionally embedded means the test looks exactly like a normal classroom activity. The students might not even realize they are taking a state assessment.
Because they aren't bubbling in A, B, C, or D.
Exactly. They are presented with a scenario where they engage in what the documents call a chain of sense-making.
A chain of sense-making. What does that look like in practice?
It's basically a series of 3 to 5 prompts that naturally flow into one another. So prompt 1 might ask a student to simply observe a phenomenon and draw a model of what they see.
Okay.
Prompt 2 might introduce a new variable and ask, well, based on your model, what happens next?
Right.
And then prompt 3 might ask them to design a solution or argue a point based on the evidence they just mapped out.
I mean, think about how you solve a problem at your job. When a project goes sideways, you don't fill out a multiple choice form. You look at the evidence, test a theory, adjust your plan, and try again.
Exactly.
This assessment is literally just grading kids on how well they do that real-world troubleshooting.
Yeah.
And honestly, my absolute favorite part of this assessment structure isn't even in the classroom. It's the parent guides.
Oh, the family connection here is incredibly robust.
Yeah. I was looking at the example from the Grade 8 Earth History Unit. They send these quick resource guides home to the parents. The scenario is about a shark tooth fossil found embedded in rock in the Midwestern United States, specifically the central lowlands.
Right.
The guide actually gives the parents prompts to ask at the dinner table. It literally says, ask your kid, how could a shark have been here where there is no ocean today? Or which do you think is older, the shark tooth or the rock?
It connects the classroom directly to the living room. The system generates an individual student report, which provides QR codes leading to specific family learning resources. And it tailors those resources based on the student's exact instructional needs, categorized into green, yellow, or red levels of support.
So if my kid is really struggling with the concept of geologic time, I just scan the QR code and I get specific tools to help debug that specific concept over dinner.
Yep.
It turns the whole family into a little team of scientists.
Oh.
But I do have a logistical question. We've got parents asking about shark teeth, kids dissecting owl pellets, debugging complex mental models. How does a teacher actually manage a classroom where 30 kids are all trying to solve different mysteries at once? You can't just use standard rows of desks for that.
No, the physical and cultural environment of the classroom has to shift entirely. And that brings us to the BioForge framework in Alaska.
Right.
BioForge is a 7th grade life science course, but it explicitly treats the classroom as a live and feed station, a design studio, and a scientific workshop.
The curriculum outlines this incredible year-long narrative arc.
Yeah.
Students don't just walk in as passive pupils. On day 1, they are designated as apprentice scientists.
Which changes everything.
Right. And they are tasked with answering one massive overarching question for the whole year. How can we understand living systems well enough to protect, explain, and responsibly shape them?
It gives real-world stakes to everything they do. They aren't just learning biology to pass a test, they're learning it to protect their environment. As the year progresses, they level up through specific roles. They move from observers to modelers, then investigators, evidence builders, systems thinkers. and finally, designers of solutions.
And what makes this progression so stunning to me is how it incorporates the history of the specific place where they are learning. The source documents emphasize the intentional integration of traditional ecological knowledge, or tech, alongside Western science.
Yes.
For example, they study the hydrodynamics of a traditional fish weir, which is an indigenous trap designed to catch fish using the natural flow of the river right alongside the migratory patterns of apex predators.
Broadening the definition of what constitutes science is a massive part of this framework. It honors science as an 11,000-year legacy of engineering and observation in Alaska.
Right.
It teaches students that science isn't just a static collection of facts imported from a textbook publisher in another time zone. It shows that diverse cultures have been actively observing, modeling, and designing solutions in this specific environment for millennia.
It totally validates their local history as rigorous scientific history. But here's the catch. If you are asking middle school students to act as designers and community stewards, if they are out there testing models and inevitably failing as part of the scientific process, they're going to hit a wall emotionally.
Oh, for sure. Middle school is tough enough.
Right. When the stakes are real, the failures feel real. How do they handle that without just giving up?
That is the pivotal question. If you want students to embrace the messy workshop of learning, they need serious internal tools. They need cognitive architecture. And this introduces the core philosophy anchoring all of this, Elastic Cultural Standard D6.
Okay, let me pull the exact quote from the source here because this is central to everything. Standard D6 states, students engage in a realistic self-assessment to identify strengths and needs and make appropriate decisions to enhance life skills.
Yeah.
I want to direct this to you listening right now. Think about your own life. How often do you engage in a truly realistic self-assessment to actually enhance a life skill rather than just, being hard on yourself?
And the distinction the framework makes here is vital. Realistic self-assessment is practically defined as the ability to notice what is working, identify what needs support, examine evidence, make a reasonable decision, try a next step, and revise when necessary.
And the curriculum is very clear about what realistic self-assessment is not.
Right.
It is not harsh self-criticism. It's not looking at the person sitting next to you and comparing your progress.
Yeah.
It certainly isn't confessing private information or pretending to be confident when you aren't.
Exactly.
And it is definitely not labeling yourself as inherently good or bad at a subject.
So how do you actually teach a 12-year-old to do that? The framework organizes it around a very practical 7-step cycle. Notice, name, check the evidence, choose, act, review, and revise.
Let's run through a concrete example. Say I'm a student and I'm working on a difficult group project about that sleep weir, and there's a huge disagreement in the group. We are totally stalled.
Okay, so first, you notice the friction. You acknowledge that you feel frustrated and the group isn't making progress.
Okay.
Then you name it. You say, we aren't communicating well, and I have stopped doing my part of the research. Next, you check the evidence. Why are you stalled? Is it because you don't understand the hydrodynamics, or is it because you haven't managed your time well and you're covering it up by arguing?
Okay, so once I check the evidence and realize it's a time management issue, I choose a strategy. I act on it. Maybe I pull out a calendar or, I ask an elder, a family member, a mentor, or a teacher for guidance on how to schedule the work.
Yes, help seeking is huge here.
Right. And then, crucially, we review and revise if that first plan didn't actually fix the group dynamic. It takes the emotion and the ego out of failure and turns it into actionable data.
And that cycle supports everything from personal responsibility and teamwork to emotional regulation and problem solving. The cognitive architecture document in our sources explains that embedding these specific habits into daily science practices provides scaffolding within a student's zone of proximal development.
Wait, zone of proximal development, let's clarify that. That's basically the sweet spot of learning, right? The space between what a kid can do completely on their own and what they can't do at all, even with help.
Exactly. It's where growth happens. And doing this effectively requires what researcher Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. When students view their intellectual ability and their problem-solving skills as malleable, rather than fixed traits they were born with, they become willing to embrace mistakes. They take responsible risks.
And you can actually hear this in the classroom through a deliberate shift in vocabulary. There is a massive difference between a student saying, I cannot do this, versus I cannot do this yet.
Yes. Or shifting to, I need another strategy, or I need support.
Or, my absolute favorite, the environment is creating a barrier.
That realization is huge.
It is. Because sometimes it's not a lack of innate ability, It's a lack of the right tools, or the space is too loud, or the timeline is unrealistic. Identifying that is a high-level skill.
And we also have to recognize that families and cultures define competence, independence, and maturity quite differently. In this framework, strengths aren't narrowly defined as just getting an A on a written test.
Not at all. Strengths in this model include practical knowledge, keen observation, deep listening, humor.
Cultural knowledge, persistence, care for others.
Yeah, even things like creativity or repair skills. Knowing exactly when to stop and ask for help isn't seen as a weakness. It is framed as a profound strength and a sign of leadership.
Which ties perfectly into the communal aspect of Standard D. This isn't just self-assessment for the sake of individual ambition, it's deeply relational. The curriculum expects students to assume responsibilities for the well-being of their cultural community.
Right, like gathering oral histories to find solutions to everyday problems.
It fundamentally changes the purpose of evaluation. Students are assessing their own growth, their communication, their problem solving, their preparation for adult life, not just for a grade on a piece of paper, but to become a more capable, contributing member of their family and community.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's zoom out and look at the whole picture. We've gone from a system that punishes wrong answers to one that treats misconceptions as necessary, logical stepping stones. We've explored how assessments like SIPS measure the mechanics of problem solving rather than rote memorization, even bringing complex phenomena like geologic time to the family dinner table. And we've seen how incorporating 11,000 years of indigenous engineering transforms the classroom from a passive museum into a place-based, community-focused workshop, entirely driven by realistic self-assessment.
It leads to a really compelling thought about the ultimate purpose of learning. We often talk about schooling as preparation to leave home. We tell kids to study hard so they can go out into the real world and make something of themselves somewhere else.
Yeah, always somewhere else.
But what if the ultimate test of a true education is exactly the opposite? What if it's about how deeply you can observe, understand, and responsibly shape the community and the natural world right outside your own front door?
Preparing to stay, to steward, to build. I love that. Before we go, we want to leave you with a quick reflection based on that realistic self-assessment cycle we just talked about. It takes away the sting of perfectionism, and honestly, it works just as well for adults as it does for 7th graders.
It really does.
Take just a moment today to run the cycle and identify these 4 things for yourself. First, name one strength you have that you can support with actual evidence. Maybe it's your persistence or your listening skills. Second, name one specific skill or habit you actually want to strengthen right now. Third, identify one person or resource that can help you do it. And fourth, choose one small, actionable next step to take today.
That's a great exercise.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Look for the anchor phenomena in your own daily life. Embrace the messy workshop of learning, and we'll catch you next time.